Hey Ravens fans, we want to continue our series of looking at some of the different possibilities for this week's NFL draft. Ryan Mink, Clifton Brown are joining me here today. And guys, we basically break down every different scenario when it comes to the draft, whether the Ravens could trade up, whether they could trade back. We talk about 20 different players who they could end up taking in the first round. And today, we want to discuss possibilities of surprises in the first round. So what do you think, Ryan? I'll give you first crack at this. What's a potential surprise that could unfold this weekend?
Yeah, if I'm looking into my magic 8-ball here, I think one possibility is the Ravens could draft a first-round safety in back-to-back years. You know, we were all kind of surprised last year with Kyle Hamilton, but best player available. You just had to take him because the talent was so good. Could they take another safety this year? Well, Brian Branch from Alabama is a versatile safety defensive back. He could really move into the spot that Kyle Hamilton played during his rookie year, while Kyle Hamilton moves into more of the Chuck Clark spot. And you really think about it, yeah, it would be surprising to take another safety, but is it surprising to take a really good defensive back from Alabama? No. So it's the non-surprise surprise. So he's a really good player. He was on one of the best defenses in college football, physical, tough, instinctive, all the things that you think of, when you say play like a Raven. That's Brian Branch. So just the position, the tag of safety is what would be surprising.
Yeah, he's kind of an X factor, which was a lot of similar descriptions of Kyle Hamilton last year. A little bit of a do-it-all, jack-of-all-trades, could play a little corner.
Yep.
So even if the Ravens were to take him, how would they end up using him?
Probably more in that slot corner.
And your point's good, which is like this is a great Alabama defensive back who could potentially be there. Right. Probably shouldn't overlook that. What do you think, Cliff?
Well, yeah, I think the big surprise would be if they don't take a corner or wide receiver at 22. So if they went that way, I think it would take somebody maybe dropping unexpectedly, like, say, a Nolan Smith, the edge rusher from Georgia, Jackson Smith-Njigba, wide receiver from Ohio State. I don't think either one of those two guys will be there. So maybe if both of those guys are gone and they don't take a corner or a wide receiver, now you're really going surprise route. Maybe Brian Beasley. We've talked about a few other guys, but I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, I think the big surprise would be them maybe, as Ryan suggested, going elsewhere with a safety for the second straight year. But I still think it's going to be a corner or wide receiver.
What about Bijan?
Yeah,
that would be a surprise.
That would be a surprise. It's like, how crazy do we want to get with the surprise this year?
That would be a surprise.
Yeah, we would all be surprised. I think if they take Bijan Robinson, the great running back out of Texas, who a lot of people think is a top 5, top 10 talent, but it's not a position of need, and the Ravens have certainly much more pressing needs. I don't see that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's
why Piper retires if it happens.
Yeah. You know what I would say is a surprise to me, which I think there's a possibility, albeit slim, would be trading up in the draft. And so how I would see this playing out would be if a certain player starts to make it a few picks in front of the Ravens. Let's just say Jackson Smith-Njigba is their top receiver on the board, and they feel like he is head and shoulders above the rest of the receivers in the class, and he's there at 18, 19. Then can they go up a few spots? They don't have much ammunition. They only have 5 draft picks. But if they can move up a little bit and get a player who they really covet, that to me is an unlikely scenario, but that's why I guess it's a surprise.
You can always draft or trade 2024 draft picks.
Yeah,
as well.
you could trade a future pick. That's a possibility. So the other thing I want to break down a little bit here today is the best case scenario. So we play out all these mock drafts on the lounge earlier this week. We released a full 7-round mock draft for the Ravens. Mink and I put that out. So when you're playing out the scenarios here, like the perfect scenario is that you want a bunch of guys who've been mocked to the Ravens there at 22. The worst case is that everybody who we've been talking about for the past month is gone.
Right.
Mink, what do you think is the perfect scenario for the Ravens when they're on the clock at 22?
Well, obviously, I think their top 2 needs are cornerback and wide receiver. So it's that you have multiple options there. You have a Joey Porter Jr. and a Deonte Banks there, maybe even an Emmanuel Forbes. I think that's probably unrealistic, but probably best case would be that 2 of those 3 corners are there for the Ravens at 22, and you have wide receiver options. Let's say a Zay Flowers is still there, a Jordan Addison is still there. I think the Ravens don't have a ton of needs going into this draft, but the ones that they have are pretty obvious. Corner being at the top of that list and wide receiver. If you have multiple options at both of those spots, that's a best case scenario, and then you're praying for the phone to ring so you can move back a little bit.
And Cliff, when you look at the receiver class, there's a potential that you have a few guys to choose from there. Like you could have Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnston all there. Potentially. I mean, I've seen some mocks that actually have Jackson Smith and Jigba still there for the Ravens, and this could be a situation potentially like 2019 where the Ravens got the number one receiver in the class in Hollywood Brown at 25. Could you see that being the scenario this week?
Well, it's possible. I think one thing, too, is they're all different receivers.
Yeah.
Like Jordan Addison, great route runner, can really do all things well. Zay Flowers, a great run-after-catch guy. And now you're talking about adding them to an offense that would also include Odell Beckham Jr. So if the Ravens do draft one of those wide receivers, they could seriously change the look of their wide receiver position, which they've already done so far. So I do think that's a possibility, but as Ryan alluded to, I think best case scenario, in my eyes, would be all three of the top corners all still being there. Joey Porter Jr., you have him still there. You have Emmanuel Forbes still there. Then you have Banks still there. Then you can just take the one that you like best,
Right.
or
So pick your flavor.
Right, or you could trade down a couple of spots and still get at least one of those guys and maybe get an extra pick.
Yep.
So that to me would be the best case scenario.
Best case scenario is the Ravens end up making a pick on Thursday night so that we don't stay up late and then have no pick to discuss. And that the pick is in Kansas City because we're going to have a crew in Kansas City bringing you all sorts of behind-the-scenes coverage of draft night. I'm telling you, you do not want to miss it. So stay tuned for a lot more to come this week.